They called it peace, but for humanity, it was little more than submission. In the heart of the galaxy, among the shining cities of the Dravans and the cold, crystalline chambers of the Valari, the Galactic Council governed with the serenity of those who had already won every battle. Peace, to them, meant silence, compliance, order. Humanity had been invited into this grand civilization nearly 2 centuries ago. It was framed as an act of benevolence. The Zorathi extended their 3-fingered claws and offered Earth a seat at the table. But the seat came with chains. They labeled it uplift. The term sounded noble, but it masked what it truly was, a soft colonization of culture, economy, and identity. Humans weren't banned from space. They were just never trusted to use it freely. Their colonies were chosen for them. Their ships were inspected, registered, restricted. When Earth attempted to develop faster than standard warp drives, citing their own unique physics solutions, the Council declared the technology unstable and banned it galaxy-wide, just as their own war fleets adopted near-identical propulsion. Humanity's ingenuity was tolerated so long as it could be used. Its culture was mocked, its emotions patronized, its morality viewed as quaint and obsolete. But humans endured. They always had. They were builders, adapters. They learned the galactic common faster than any other species before them. They translated alien technologies, optimized them, and in many cases surpassed them, only to be told they were violating cultural patents or technological sovereignty laws. Human soldiers became a staple of border conflicts. They were praised for their bravery but were often placed in the deadliest positions. Commanders from other species found them useful, predictable, disposable. The death tolls climbed, but humans didn't rebel. They filed complaints. They held protests. They submitted reports to the ethics subcommittees. Every time, they were met with indifference disguised as protocol. When human trade guilds outcompete Valari monopolies in logistics, the Council imposed new tariffs. When humans formed an interstellar university for cross-species knowledge, the Dravans shut it down, citing cultural contamination. When a human colony achieved food independence using a terraforming technique no other race had managed, Council inspectors suddenly declared the process ecologically unsafe, after licensing the method for exclusive use by Valari terraformers. Humanity watched, tolerated, tried to play the long game. They formed alliances, but every one of them ended in betrayal or erosion. Treaties were rewritten in fine print. Promises were delayed indefinitely. Whenever humans spoke out, they were reminded that they were young, emotionally volatile, and still learning galactic etiquette. And yet, the numbers told a different story. In less than 200 years, humanity had built the second-largest colonial network under Council oversight. They developed medical breakthroughs that saved billions of non-human lives. They reverse-engineered alien starcraft to reduce manufacturing costs across several systems. Their artists, once dismissed as primitive, became cultural icons on a dozen worlds. But none of it mattered in the chambers of the Council. When humans asked for equal voting rights, they were told it was too soon. When they requested full autonomy for their colonies, they were accused of isolationism. When they appealed for recognition of their cultural heritage zones, the request was tied up in interdepartmental reviews for decades. Even then, humanity didn't declare war. They built. They organized. They tried to prove their worth through persistence. Earth became a quiet hub of innovation. Mars turned into a manufacturing powerhouse. The moons of Jupiter housed think tanks and research outposts that rivaled the best in the galaxy. But respect never came. What did come were whispers, soft, mocking tones in council halls. Humans are too emotional. They reproduce too fast. They lack the patience of long-lived species. Their history is soaked in war. It's only a matter of time. These weren't fringe views. They were spoken openly. A Valari diplomat once referred to humans as sentient combustion engines, burning everything in their path for movement. The Council laughed. No sanctions followed. It wasn't hatred. Hatred at least recognized the threat. It was disregard. So humanity waited, and they watched. They took notes. Every insult filed. Every betrayal recorded. They compiled failures, not out of bitterness, but as proof. Proof that they had tried. That they had exhausted diplomacy. That when the time came, no one could say they acted too soon. Andros 9 was not yet smoldering. But the conditions had already been set. The foundation for refusal had already hardened. For humanity, it was no longer a question of whether they belonged in the galaxy. They had proven that 100 times over. The real question, now sharpened into something far more dangerous, was how long they were willing to let others pretend they didn't. The answer was coming. And no civilization would forget it. It began with a transmission, short, fragmented, and laced with static. The kind of message that was never meant to reach anyone, but somehow clawed its way through the interference. A child's voice cried out, desperate, confused, cut off mid-sentence by an explosion in the background. It lasted just 6 seconds. But that was all it took. Andros 9 had been a quiet colony. No strategic weapons, no military buildup, no sign of rebellion. It was known for agriculture, education, and diplomacy. Home to nearly 4 million humans and a small minority of allied species. A cultural gem. The kind of place the Council highlighted in its propaganda, an example of integration done right. Which is why the orbital strike made no sense. The Zorathi claimed it was a preemptive response. That intelligence had confirmed a weapons stockpile hidden beneath the main administrative complex. That insurgents were planning to hijack diplomatic vessels. That there was no time for negotiation. They called it a containment measure. But satellite data told a different story. Surveillance logs showed no unusual traffic. No military-grade heat signatures. No coded communications that indicated armed cells. Just one peaceful colony, vaporized from orbit in under 2 minutes. Over a dozen kinetic rods deployed at terminal velocity. No warning. No chance to flee. Of the 4 million residents, only 12,000 survived. Most were in underground aquifer tunnels or deep mining shafts, shielded by chance. What emerged from those tunnels wasn't just grief, it was a scream. Not of rage, not yet. Just disbelief. Human emergency response units arrived within 48 hours, despite the Council's no-fly restrictions. What they found were ash fields where cities had stood, glass soil that would never grow again, and melted streets where children once played. The Council issued a formal statement expressing regret for the loss of life but maintained that the operation had been justified under Article 27C. Prevention of speculative escalation. The survivors asked for justice. They asked for the data used to authorize the strike. They asked for a joint investigation. Every request was delayed, then denied. The Zorathi ambassador dismissed the death toll as exaggerated. He referred to it as a regrettable but necessary demonstration of deterrence. It wasn't just the dead that burned. It was the indifference. Across human systems, grief turned to fury. Protests erupted. Digital walls were flooded with images of Andros 9 before and after the attack. The faces of the dead. The last fragments of intercepted calls. A mother singing to her child over a comlink as the ground cracked beneath them. The Council held an emergency session. Humanity's delegation presented evidence, eyewitness accounts, data from orbital debris. The response was procedural. A review committee would be formed in 3 cycles. An inquiry might begin in 5. Compensation would be discussed later. No sanctions. No formal charges. Not even a suspension. And that's when something shifted. Quietly, and all at once. It wasn't declared. No manifesto was written. But a consensus formed across the human diaspora. Something unspoken and absolute. They had waited long enough. Appealed long enough. Proved themselves again and again. And still, when the worst was done to them, it was met with shrugs and red tape. The moment passed like a shadow across Earth, Mars, Europa, the belt stations, the outer colonies. No orders were needed. People simply stopped playing by rules that had never protected them. Human captains began declining escort missions for Council trade fleets. Logistics chains rerouted away from shared depots. Research outposts closed access to shared databanks. Human-operated wormholes were recalibrated for safety, effectively cutting off dozens of supply routes. Andros 9 became a name heavier than war. It was whispered in low tones by human workers, written in encrypted memorials across comms networks, chanted during silent marches and orbital rings. But for the Council, it was already old news. One more incident in a galaxy used to casualty reports. What they didn't see was what followed. Veteran commanders resigned from Council fleets overnight. Human engineers began disappearing from Valari-controlled systems. Prominent scientists, diplomats, and transport authorities left their posts, citing return to home territory. When questioned, their alien employers received polite but firm refusals to explain. At first, the Council dismissed these patterns as emotional overreaction. Humans, after all, had always been impulsive. Always needed time to calm down. But the departures didn't stop. They accelerated. The Anders Survivors Collective began receiving funds, millions in credits, traced back to hundreds of sources. Retired war heroes. Ex-corporate magnates. Even artists and entertainers began channeling earnings into the organization. Not for memorials. Not for press. For something else. The Zorathi were never punished. But something far worse began haunting them: silence. No more messages from Earth. No more human contractors answering their calls. No more collaboration offers. Entire industries began noticing a lack of human participation. A third of independent research projects collapsed due to human withdrawal. The silence wasn't just absence. It was preparation. Behind closed systems and shielded transmissions, a phrase began circulating through encoded channels. Never again. Short. Absolute. Not screamed. Not posted on banners. Just repeated among ship crews, station workers, teachers, colonists. It became a promise shared by people who had nothing left to beg for. And in that silence, something else began. Human spaceports saw increased traffic from unmarked freighters. Construction materials that didn't match civilian blueprints. Deep space scans registered strange power signatures near fringe territories. Sensor drones dispatched by curious species simply vanished. There was no declaration. No rallying speech. But everyone who had seen the ruins of Andros 9 knew the truth. The galaxy had been warned. And humanity had stopped waiting. The retreat was methodical. No alarms, no proclamations, just absence. Human consulates in neutral zones closed overnight. Diplomatic offices, long filled with negotiators and policy analysts, were stripped clean, files deleted, servers wiped. When the Council inquired, they were told the closures were internal reorganization. No further clarification was offered. Orbital hubs where human engineers once maintained key transport routes began powering down. Interstellar relay stations went offline one by one. Commercial traffic slowed. Merchant convoys rerouted. For a civilization that had always been present, everywhere, always engaged, humanity was disappearing. At first, no one took it seriously. Analysts speculated it was a political maneuver, a show of discontent after the Council's refusal to prosecute the Andros 9 massacre. Others believed it was economic, perhaps a resource crisis, or internal restructuring. But as weeks turned into months, the scope became undeniable. Terraforming projects on outer colonies halted mid-cycle. Human universities and shared systems closed enrollment to non-human students. Entire orbital shipyards were dismantled or relocated into sectors no longer charted by Council-approved maps. Human media streams went dark, replaced by static or blank slates that simply read, "Access restricted." Fleets of unmarked transports began launching from deep core colonies. Their flight paths avoided all monitored lanes. No transponder signals. No comms. Just long, slow arcs toward the galactic fringe. And behind the silence, movement. Planetary governments, once politically fragmented, began sinking in action. Earth, Mars, Luna, the Jovian moons, the Martian Directorate, and even fringe settlements on Titan and Ceres, all aligned their policies without a single public summit. Trade across human systems became faster, more efficient, but strictly internal. They no longer relied on council approval for starship construction, material procurement, or legal arbitration. Military veterans began disappearing from public records. Names removed. Service histories purged. Former officers, scientists, and strategic planners suddenly unreachable. Their families received vague notices of relocation or reassignment. Among the council elite, unease grew. For the first time, there were no complaints from humanity. No petitions. No debates. The usual channels, flooded for decades with requests, proposals, ideas, stood empty. Humanity was no longer asking. Encrypted signals spiked across deep space. Bursts of data impossible to decode, carried through quantum-linked buoys. When traced, they always led to dead zones, areas previously mapped as lifeless, now showing energy spikes just above sensor thresholds. Council scouts were sent. Only a few returned. The rest simply vanished, no distress signals, no debris. Those who made it back reported strange readings, gravitational fluctuations, sensor jamming, ship systems momentarily unresponsive. None could provide visual data. Recordings failed, corrupted. Speculation spread. Was humanity preparing for war? Had they developed a new weapon? Were they leaving the galaxy entirely? The term, Project Hades, surfaced once, leaked through a compromised communication on a minor station. The file was corrupted, mostly unreadable, except for a single fragment. Containment no longer viable, escalation required, protocol, Hades initiated. The name spread like wildfire in shadow channels. Hades. Not a fleet. Not a weapon. A protocol. But what it entailed, no one knew. Black market rumors grew wild. Some claimed humans had developed a form of AI beyond current limitations, true autonomous intelligence, capable of decentralized decision-making. Others spoke of a dimensional shift engine, a method to move not just through space, but parallel planes. Some believed the entire species was preparing for extinction-level contingency. A few whispered that humanity had made contact with something older, deeper, and they weren't just withdrawing, they were preparing for something coming. The truth was simpler, and far more dangerous. Humanity was aligning. For the first time since reaching the stars, every fragment, faction, and frontier fell under a single silent directive: prepare. Scientific enclaves on Europa, long dismissed as eccentric, became secure zones overnight. Martian orbital rings activated defense satellites that had previously never been acknowledged. Civilian mining vessels were retrofitted with shielding and automated turrets. Training academies resumed military instruction under new doctrine, no longer modeled after Council war games, but built on simulations using real, asymmetric human warfare tactics. Colonies once struggling with internal disputes began operating with eerie synchronization. No elections were held. No public decrees were made. Yet decisions flowed smoothly, projects accelerated, and supply chains moved with impossible coordination. Even cultural shifts occurred. Entertainment hubs stopped importing council-backed content. Human media turned inward: documentaries, history archives, coded visual messages. Art that once celebrated cooperation now showed sacrifice, defiance, unity under pressure. The message was clear without being spoken: remember who we are. And amid all this, human AI systems began locking down. Commercial AIs, previously leased to non-human corporations, were recalled. Software updates disabled embedded backdoors. Data centers severed from external access. Not out of paranoia, but precision. Then came the silence in intelligence networks. Human codebreakers and analysts once embedded across council operations began vanishing. Their work deleted, wiped clean. What once served as a valuable resource pool, decades of shared intelligence, suddenly became a wall. All attempts to communicate with Earth were redirected to auto-responses. Your inquiry has been received. Nothing more. Then came the last contact. A message broadcast on all known council frequencies. One sentence, calm and absolute. Our silence is not absence. It is preparation. That was it. No follow-up. No demands. The council debated action. Some called for sanctions, others for diplomacy. But no plan ever moved forward. They didn't know where to begin. The humans had simply stepped out of reach, and in doing so, changed the board entirely. They weren't rebelling. They weren't requesting reform. They were moving. Quietly. Fully. Together. And the galaxy watched, for the first time, not with ridicule, but with fear. The first tangible sign wasn't a fleet or a declaration. It was a void. One of the Council's core hyperspace lanes went dark. Patrol beacons along Route 17A failed to report. Traffic halted. When scout ships were sent, they found nothing, no debris, no malfunction. The entire stretch of space, once buzzing with commerce, had become inaccessible. Within days, other lanes followed. Each a key artery for trade, diplomacy, and military logistics. Human-controlled relays, long considered benign infrastructure, had been reprogrammed. No viruses. No sabotage. Just reconfiguration. Council ships received no navigation clearance. Civilian craft were ignored. What once facilitated galactic traffic now served only one network, humanity's. The Council convened in emergency chambers, scrambling to assert jurisdiction. But their own dependency betrayed them. For decades, they had relied on human-built systems for speed and efficiency. Now, those systems answered to no one but themselves. In outer sectors, Valari trade convoys vanished. No piracy reports. No distress calls. Search parties recovered black boxes days later, each recording a moment of systems failure followed by complete silence. Navigation went blind. Comms dead. Then nothing. But the pattern wasn't chaos. The attacks, if they could be called that, were surgical. Only vessels directly supporting Council enforcement or sanctioned corporate movements were targeted. Civilian ships were left untouched. Non-human species unaffiliated with Council politics were unaffected. The message was deliberate: this wasn't war. It was rejection. Meanwhile, in fringe sectors, unregistered human ships appeared in systems thought uninhabited. Mobile foundries, defense grids, stealth platforms, entire networks established without fanfare. When approached, they issued a simple, uniform broadcast. This territory is no longer under Council oversight. Approach at your own risk. The Council tried to reassert control through economic pressure. Sanctions were levied against human trade guilds. Licenses revoked. Contracts dissolved. But none of it mattered. Human colonies had become self-sufficient. They no longer imported critical resources. Supply chains had long since shifted inward. Financial markets in Draven space began to wobble. Entire sectors that depended on human logistical AI struggled to maintain baseline performance. Predictive models failed. Delivery routes collapsed. Analysts discovered that over 40% of critical infrastructure quietly relied on systems humans had built, refined, or optimized. No backup plans existed. When Council enforcement ships entered the Delisar Expanse, a human-dominated neutral zone, they were met not with fire, but silence. Their own systems began failing. Shields flickered. Guidance scrambled. The crews had no choice but to retreat before catastrophe. No weapons were fired. But the territory had spoken. Whispers grew louder. Entire species began questioning their position. The Rel, once silent trade partners with the Valari, opened quiet channels with Martian diplomats. The Tsiari, long considered Council loyalists, began withdrawing from shared military programs, citing restructuring. Even minor species began repositioning embassies closer to human sectors, subtly shifting allegiance. None of this was forced. Humanity never issued demands. They offered no alliances, no treaties, no invitations. But their mere act of refusal, precise and disciplined, pulled the galaxy's balance out of orbit. Then came the reveal. In the dead silence of galactic rotation, a pulse spread across Council frequencies. A data packet, compressed and clean, with no source signal. It contained one file, a complete schematic of Project Dominion, the Council's classified plan for full-spectrum surveillance and contingency enforcement across every member species. It had been in development for decades, hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy. A system designed to monitor, control, and if necessary, suppress emerging threats within volatile civilizations. Humanity had been its primary test subject. The revelations hit like a solar flare. Every denial, every restriction, every regulation, it hadn't been diplomatic oversight. It had been control. Preemptive containment. The leak shattered public trust across thousands of systems. Protests erupted on Valari worlds. Draven universities, once the heart of the Council's ideology, faced walkouts. Minor species demanded audits, transparency, sovereignty. For the first time in centuries, the illusion of unity cracked. Humanity didn't gloat. They issued no follow-up. The leak stood on its own. The truth needed no narrator. In response, the Council attempted damage control. Offers of reform, new charters, increased representation. Promises of independent investigations. But no one was listening. The galaxy's attention had shifted. Not to Earth. Not to any human planet. But to the unknown space beyond the outer reach, regions now cloaked in new gravitational anomalies, untraceable signals, and distorted star maps. Every attempt to scan was blocked. Every drone lost. Whatever humanity was building, it wasn't visible. It wasn't advertised. It was simply happening. Then, as if to confirm the new order, a single Zorathi dreadnought violated neutral borders. A final provocation. A show of strength. It disappeared within minutes. No distress call. No wreckage. Just gone. The Council fell silent. They understood. There would be no war. Humanity wasn't fighting for control. They were beyond that. They had evolved past the need to ask permission. In their silence, they had redefined power, not by force, but by removing themselves as a variable the Council could predict or manipulate. They had ceased being a member state. They had become something else entirely. Not a rebellion. Not a revolution. A reckoning. It started with a flicker, an anomaly in deep space telemetry picked up by independent stations across the fringe. At first, it looked like noise, non-repeating gravitational pulses just outside mapped space. No visible objects, no thermal signatures. But the patterns weren't random. They had rhythm, cadence, intent. Within days, dozens of arrays across multiple species confirmed it. These were signals. Not communication, not a beacon, something else entirely. The pulses matched no known propulsion method, no known technology. Whatever was generating them existed beyond the edge of current galactic charts, past human frontier zones that had been dark for months. The Council launched probes. Every one disappeared without trace. Their signals cut off mid-transmission, sometimes within seconds of breaching the anomaly boundary. Rumors spread fast. Some said it was a weapon test. Others claimed humanity had found something ancient, perhaps even predating known civilization. But the truth came in the form of a single file, encrypted, clean, undeniable. Dropped anonymously onto every major Council system simultaneously. It contained coordinates. No explanation. No threat. Just a location. Council leadership hesitated for days. Then, driven by fear of uncertainty rather than strategy, they sent a delegation, a small fleet of diplomats, analysts, and scientists, escorted by 2 dreadnoughts. The fleet vanished before reaching destination. Every trace of their approach erased from space-time sensors. Not destroyed. Not jammed. Just removed. What followed wasn't panic. It was paralysis. The Council couldn't act without risking collapse. Their supply lines were failing, their alliances fraying, and public trust disintegrating. Species that once relied on council order were now openly coordinating with human systems, or at least trying. Most received no reply. Others were granted limited contact, strictly through automated relays, often with delayed responses, sometimes with none at all. When contact did come, it came with rules. No entry into restricted sectors. No surveillance. No data collection. Violations would be met with immediate interdiction. No negotiation. No diplomacy. Enforcement was absolute. For the first time, humanity issued commands, not requests. And they were obeyed. Not out of loyalty. Out of realization. The Council had built its power on predictability. Humanity had shattered that foundation. Reports began surfacing of ships encountering massive constructs in the void, structures unlike anything seen before. Not stations. Not fleets. Moving configurations of matter and energy, silently patrolling boundaries now claimed by no one but respected by all. They carried no flags. Emitted no signals. But their presence was undeniable. They didn't engage unless approached. But when they did, it was surgical. One Centauri cruiser, attempting a stealth scan, was disabled within seconds, its engines shut down, data wiped, and then released with its crew unharmed. The message was implicit: observe at your own risk. Then came the shift in civilian behavior. Migration patterns reversed. Species long embedded in core council territories began requesting passage through human zones, not to flee, but to settle. Not because they were promised anything, but because they believed one thing: where humanity had gone, there was protection. Earth didn't become the center. It became a symbol. A world once underestimated, once seen as volatile and naive, now stood silent at the center of the largest power realignment in known history. Its silence was a wall. Its absence, a presence greater than war. The most stunning shift came not from governments, but from knowledge. Humanity released a compressed archive to the wider galactic network, uncensored, unfiltered data on Council black projects, surveillance algorithms, species manipulation plans, and economic rigging. It was not an attack. It was exposure. The truth crippled what remained of centralized power. Systems turned on their leaders. Mutinies occurred not with violence but with abandonment. Entire sectors severed ties, not because they sided with humanity, but because they could no longer trust the system that had ruled them. And still, humanity made no move to capitalize. No annexations. No invasions. No declarations of empire. They didn't seek territory. They enforced only one thing: boundary. Within that line, they allowed no interference. Outside it, they offered no promises. Council envoys begged for communication. Some pleaded for cooperation. Others threatened consequences. They received the same response: automated, sterile, final. Contact denied. The consequence has already occurred. It wasn't arrogance. It was reality. Humanity had grown into something unbound by the galaxy's previous limitations. Their networks no longer required council gates. Their power didn't rest on fleets or weapons alone. It was strategic independence, total system cohesion, and the will to act without permission. They became not a faction, but a force. Other civilizations began adapting. Quietly adopting elements of human design. Emulating infrastructure protocols. Copying independent logistics. Not to challenge humanity, but to survive in the world it had remade. The name Endress 9 faded from media but never from memory. It had become sacred, not a wound, but a scar that dictated the course of everything that followed. It marked the moment humanity stopped pleading and started planning. It was never about revenge. It was about resolve. And as the galaxy recalibrated around this new reality, one truth remained constant. Humanity had never sought domination. They had been offered inclusion, then suffocated by regulation. Betrayed not once, but systematically. And so they left. Not physically, but ideologically. They took with them their silence, their strength, their systems. And what they left behind was a galaxy that would never again assume their compliance. The day they said enough wasn't just the end of patience. It was the birth of something the stars had never seen. A civilization unbound by fear. And unshaken by isolation. Because they had learned the most dangerous truth of all. They didn't need the galaxy. But the galaxy still needed them.